When my husband of 16 years asked for a divorce, I just nodded and signed the papers. As he celebrated his new life with his lover at our favorite restaurant, I walked to their table, a calm smile on my face. "Congratulations on your freedom," I said, sliding a manila envelope onto the white linen. His self-satisfied smirk dissolved as he read the DNA test results inside, proving a deep plum lipstick stain on a starched white cotton shirt. That was the tiny, vivid detail that unraveled my entire world. It wasn't a dramatic explosion or a tearful confrontation. It was the quiet, sickening moment of clarity I experienced standing frozen in our spacious walk-in closet, Edward's dress shirt hanging limp from my trembling fingers. I can recall the moment with perfect, chilling precision. It was a Tuesday morning, around 9:15 a.m. The boys, Jacob and Noah, were at school, and our daughter, Sophie, was at her cello lesson. I was gathering the week's laundry for the dry cleaners when I saw it. Edward's gym bag, carelessly tucked behind his neat row of polished Italian leather shoes. The zipper was caught, slightly agape, revealing the crumpled shirt he'd supposedly worn to an emergency cardiac surgery the night before. The stain wasn't blood. It wasn't a medical fluid of any kind. No surgeon, especially not one as meticulous as Dr. Edward Sterling, would wear that shade of opulent crimson into an operating room. Before we dive deeper into my shocking discovery, I want to welcome you to our community of stories. If you connect with narratives about finding strength in the aftermath of betrayal, I encourage you to click the subscribe button. It costs nothing, and your support helps us bring more tales of resilience and empowerment to light. Now, let's watch as this picture-perfect life begins to fracture. I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, as 16 years of marriage, of shared dreams and sacrifices, crystallized into this one, undeniable piece of fabric. Dr. Edward Sterling, the celebrated chief of cardiothoracic surgery, my husband, the father of our 3 children, had the ghost of another woman's kiss on his collar. The world I had so carefully built shattered, the sound of it like fine crystal breaking on a cold marble floor. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Edward's colleagues and their spouses had referred to us as the Sterling Standard. Him with his godlike hands that mended broken hearts daily, and me, Lauren, his unwavering foundation, the silent partner dedicated to our family. Our sprawling colonial home in the exclusive Willow Creek Estates, with its perfectly manicured lawn and charming white picket fence, could have been lifted from a movie set. It was the American dream, personified and polished to a high sheen. "Lauren makes it all possible," he would declare at hospital fundraisers, his arm cinched tightly around my waist, a champagne flute held aloft in his other hand. I simply couldn't do what I do without her. The other doctors' wives would offer polite, thin smiles, but I could always see the flicker of envy in their eyes. We had everything, or so it seemed. 3 wonderful, bright children, complete financial security, and a partnership that had supposedly weathered the grueling years of medical school, residency, and Edward's meteoric rise to the top of his field. Or so I had led myself to believe. Looking back now, with the painful clarity of hindsight, the warning signs were all there, like small, insidious cracks in a dam. Edward's work hours began to stretch later and later, his excuse always the same. The hospital was chronically understaffed. His weekend golf games with colleagues became more frequent and lasted longer. Our conversations, once filled with shared jokes and intimate thoughts, became clipped, transactional. We were no longer partners sharing a life. We were co-managers of a household, discussing the children's schedules, household repairs, and the social obligations necessary to further his career. When Edward was promoted to chief of cardiothoracic surgery last spring, I threw him a lavish surprise party, inviting all his colleagues and the hospital's top brass. He smiled for the cameras and thanked me publicly, but later that night, he complained that I had put him in an awkward position with the hospital board. He slept in the guest room, citing exhaustion. "It's the pressure, Lauren. I told my sister on the phone the next day, trying to convince myself as much as her. The promotion comes with so much more responsibility. Men in power have a way of changing, Lore, she had warned, her voice colored by the cynicism of her own messy divorce. I brushed off her concern, labeling it as bitterness. The physical distance between us grew into a chasm. Edward would claim crippling fatigue from 18-hour surgeries whenever he turned away from my touch in bed. I tried everything. I bought expensive new lingerie. I scheduled elaborate date nights at trendy new restaurants. I followed all the advice in women's magazines meant to reignite the spark. He would participate, but only half-heartedly, his attention constantly drifting to the glowing screen of his phone throughout our meticulously planned evenings. "Is everything all right between us?" I finally asked one night, my voice small, after he'd barely touched his favorite dish, a veal osso buco I'd spent hours preparing. "Just tired, Lauren." The Patterson case is proving to be exceptionally complicated. And then he would retreat to his home office, the heavy oak door closing with a soft but definitive click, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur as he took calls late into the night. I believed in trust. I believed in privacy. It never once occurred to me to check his phone or his emails. That was something insecure, paranoid women did, not Lauren Sterling, the perfect wife of the perfect surgeon. That illusion held until our 16th anniversary was on the horizon. I was planning a surprise romantic weekend getaway to a vineyard in Napa, the very place we had honeymooned. To ensure the dates worked, I needed to sync our calendars. One morning, his phone was sitting on the granite countertop while he was in the shower. One quick peek, just to make sure he was free that specific weekend. That was my only intention. But as I picked up the device, the screen lit up with a text notification. The name read, "Dr. Chloe Vance. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. When are you finally leaving her?" My finger trembled as I unlocked the phone and opened the message thread. It was a bottomless scroll of betrayal. Hundreds, maybe thousands of texts dating back at least 8 months. Intimate photos, secret plans made while I was driving Sophie to her cello recitals or helping the boys with their science fair projects. There were even cruel jokes made at my expense. A text from Edward. "She's planning some big anniversary surprise." Chloe's reply. "Poor thing. She still thinks there's something left to celebrate." I felt the air leave my lungs. I quietly placed the phone back on the counter, made his coffee exactly how he liked it, and kissed him goodbye as he walked out the door, briefcase in hand. Then I ran to the bathroom and vomited until all that was left was the bitter taste of bile and devastation. That night, after the children were sound asleep, I confronted him in our master bedroom. The same room where we had dreamed of our future, where we had conceived our children after years of heartbreaking struggle, where he had held me and comforted me through 2 miscarriages before we turned to IVF, where he had wiped my tears after my father passed away. "Are you sleeping with Chloe Vance?" My voice was shockingly steady, devoid of the tremor I felt in my soul. Edward didn't even flinch. He just continued his nightly ritual, methodically removing his watch and placing it on his polished mahogany nightstand. Yes. The single word hung in the air, cold and sharp. How long? He finally looked at me, and the man I saw was a stranger. His eyes, usually warm and familiar, were now 2 chips of ice. Does it really matter? I want a divorce, Lauren. The calculated cruelty in his tone was a shockwave, more stunning than the words themselves. This wasn't a confession born of guilt. It was a declaration of intent. "Why?" I whispered, the sound barely audible. "I've outgrown this life. I've outgrown us." He gestured dismissively around our beautifully decorated bedroom, as if it were a prison cell. "I've given 16 years to this marriage, to these children. I'm 48. If I'm going to start over, it has to be now." "Start over?" My voice cracked. "We built this life together, Edward. Everything you are." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that grated on my raw nerves. "Everything I am? I save lives, Lauren. What do you do?" Bake cupcakes for school fundraisers, organize my sock drawer. I built this life despite the anchor of domesticity, not because of it. His words were like physical blows. I had put my own promising teaching career on hold indefinitely to support him through medical school. I had managed our home, our finances, and our children single-handedly so he could focus entirely on climbing the professional ladder. I had hosted countless dinner parties for hospital administrators and board members to help him network and secure his position. "You'll be taken care of financially," he continued, his voice adopting the detached tone of a businessman discussing a hostile takeover. "The children will adjust. They always do." That night, he moved his things into the guest room for good. I lay awake in our marital bed, the sheets cold beside me, meticulously reconstructing the past 16 years of my life, questioning every memory, wondering if any of it had ever been real. He left for the hospital before the sun came up the next morning. On the kitchen counter, placed squarely where I would see it, was a business card for his lawyer. The perfect life I thought we had built was nothing more than a mirage. The cracks had always been there. I had just been too busy, too dedicated to maintaining our shared illusion to ever see them. What I didn't know then was that the lipstick stain and the affair were just the surface fractures. The true betrayal ran so much deeper, woven into the very fabric of our family, and the nature of his deception would soon turn my world upside down in a way that would make his infidelity seem almost trivial by comparison. The day after Edward left his lawyer's card on my kitchen counter like a parting insult, I scheduled a meeting with Eleanor Croft, known throughout Willow Creek as the most formidable divorce attorney in the state. I needed to understand what I was up against to prepare myself for the inevitable battle. Eleanor's first piece of advice was delivered with a steely gaze. "Document everything, Lauren, especially the finances." That evening, after tucking the children into bed, with hollow reassurances that Daddy's just incredibly busy at the hospital, I went to our home safe. Inside were 16 years of our shared financial life, tax returns, investment portfolios, property deeds. As I began to sift through the mountain of paperwork, discrepancies started to appear, like dark, ugly threads in what I had always believed was a seamless tapestry. I found a pattern of monthly withdrawals, $8,000, $10,000, sometimes even $12,000, all transferred from our joint savings account to an unknown entity called Crestview Equity. There were no corresponding invoices, no explanations, no paper trail to indicate where this money was ultimately going. Over the past 2 years alone, nearly $300,000 had vanished into this corporate black hole. The next morning, I contacted our private banker. The account manager was initially evasive, but as the primary account holder, I had a right to the information. He eventually confirmed my growing suspicions. Crestview Equity was a limited liability company registered solely in Edward's name. The money trail went cold right there. "Is this common in divorces?" I asked Eleanor during our next meeting, sliding the damning bank statements across her expansive mahogany desk. "Hiding assets?" She sighed, examining the documents through a pair of narrow reading glasses perched on her nose. "Unfortunately, yes. It's chapter 1 of the Scumbag Husband Playbook. But this pattern, it suggests something far more calculated, something long-term." It was during this conversation that Eleanor casually mentioned Dr. Samuel Reed. "The name came up in another case of mine," she explained. "He was a former colleague of your husband's. Left Northwood General about 3 years ago under, let's say, interesting circumstances. Might be worth having a chat with him." I remembered Dr. Reed vaguely, a quiet, intensely focused man who always seemed out of place and uncomfortable at the hospital's glitzy social functions. He had simply disappeared from the prominent medical community without a word. When I'd asked Edward about it at the time, he had dismissed my query with a wave of his hand. Professional differences. Nothing interesting. It took me 5 phone calls and a bit of creative social engineering to track down his current practice, a modest family clinic located 40 miles outside the city, a world away from the gleaming towers of Northwood General. His receptionist was protective, but when I mentioned Eleanor Croft's name, she put me through. Dr. Reed agreed to meet me for coffee the next day. He chose a small, anonymous cafe halfway between the city and his new life. He looked older than I remembered, the stress of whatever he knew etched into the lines around his eyes. "I always knew this day would come," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't know which one of us would break first, me with my conscience or Edward with his boundless arrogance." What he revealed over the next hour didn't just crack my world, it pulverized what was left of it. "The fertility clinic at Northwood had a problem," he explained, his gaze fixed on the swirling foam in his untouched latte. "Several couples were reporting failed IVF procedures, despite having optimal conditions. I was in the lab back then, and I started noticing inconsistencies in the reports, small differences between the official documentation and the actual procedures performed. My hands trembled so violently I had to set my own cup down. We had endured 3 agonizing rounds of IVF to conceive the boys, and another 2 for Sophie. Each failure had been a soul-crushing devastation, each success a seeming miracle. I began investigating quietly," he continued. "The clinic director, a man named Dr. Mercer, was falsifying results, substituting specimens, and manipulating success rates to maintain the clinic's stellar reputation, and more importantly, its funding. When I finally confronted him, he admitted that Edward was aware of it all. In fact, he was more than aware. He was complicit." "That's impossible," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Edward wanted children as much as I did. We both did." Dr. Reed slid a small silver thumb drive across the table. Hospital records, lab reports, Edward's signature authorizing procedural modifications. "That was his euphemism for tampering with specimens, including yours. Why?" My voice was a raw, broken thing. Why would he do this to us? Initially, it was about career advancement. "Doctor..." Mercer sat on the board that later promoted Edward to chief. "It was a quid pro quo. But with your case..." He hesitated, his eyes full of pity. "Edward has a hereditary condition, Marfan syndrome. It's mild in his case, but there's a 50% chance of passing it on to his children. For a surgeon of his ambition, whose entire brand is built on perfection and steady hands, he couldn't risk having children with a genetic condition that might reflect poorly on his professional image. The implications crashed over me in a suffocating wave. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. So, during our IVF treatments..." "He made sure his sperm was never actually used," Dr. Reed finished grimly. "The clinic used anonymous donors instead. Edward knew exactly what he was doing from the very beginning. I left that cafe with the thumb drive burning a hole in my purse and a recommendation for a discreet genetic testing service. That night, after the children were asleep, I moved through the house like a ghost, collecting the DNA samples. A few strands of hair from their brushes, saliva swabs from their toothbrushes. I included a sample from one of Edward's old combs from the master bathroom he no longer occupied. The 2-week wait for the results was an exercise in pure agony. In the meantime, Edward had accelerated the divorce proceedings. He was demanding custody evaluations. His lawyers claiming my emotional instability made me an unfit mother. They sent intimidating letters questioning my ability to financially support the children on my own, suggesting my contribution to the family had been minimal at best. They offered a paltry settlement, a calculated move designed to break me and force me into a quick, quiet submission. Through it all, I maintained the facade. I helped Jacob and Noah with their science projects. I sat in the front row at Sophie's cello recital, clapping until my hands were sore. I smiled politely at school drop-offs, nodding when other mothers asked about Edward's conspicuous absence. His hospital schedule is just brutal, I'd say, with a practiced, weary sigh. You know how it is? At night, I devoured information on medical ethics violations and fertility fraud. The cases I found were horrifying. Doctors secretly using their own sperm, clinics mixing up embryos, families discovering shattering biological truths decades down the line. But nowhere could I find a case quite like ours, of a husband deliberately ensuring his own children weren't biologically his, all to protect his career and his ego. The testing company called on a Tuesday morning. The woman's voice on the other end was professional, detached, and utterly chilling. "We have your results, Mrs. Sterling. Would you like me to email them, or would you prefer to discuss them over the phone?" "Email," I whispered, knowing I needed to see the truth in black and white. The clinical scientific language of the report could not soften the brutal blow. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested children. The probability of paternity is 0%. I printed 3 copies. One went to my lawyer, Eleanor. Another went into a new safety deposit box I'd opened in my name only. And the third, I slipped into a cream-colored envelope embossed with the Northwood General Hospital logo, which I'd taken from Edward's home office during those long weeks of pretending our life wasn't a complete lie. My hands didn't shake anymore. The devastation had crystallized into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Purpose. This was no longer about an affair or hidden assets. This was about a fundamental betrayal that had begun before our children were even conceived. Edward had robbed me of my choice, my autonomy. He had constructed an elaborate 16-year lie that had shaped my entire adult life, my identity as a mother and our children's very existence, all while positioning himself as the brilliant, dedicated father and surgeon. The truth changed everything, and I now possessed the one thing that could ensure it changed everything for him, too. With the DNA results clutched in my hand, my grief morphed into a sharp, crystalline focus. Edward had spent 16 years meticulously constructing a false reality. Now I would dismantle it, piece by painful piece. I started by reaching out to the other families who had undergone fertility treatments at Northwood during the same period. Dr. Reed provided me with a list of 27 couples who might have been affected. Most understandably refused to speak with me, terrified of questioning the origins of their beloved children. But 5 agreed to meet in secret. There were the Millers, whose twin sons looked nothing like either of them, the Patels, whose daughter was born with a series of unexpected medical conditions. The Johnsons, the Garcias, and the Wilsons each had their own stories of miraculous conceptions that occurred only after Dr. Mercer had taken a personal interest in their cases. "We were just so grateful," Sarah Wilson told me, tears streaming down her face. "We never thought to question the how." My search for allies led me to Brenda Miles, a former nurse who had worked in the fertility clinic for 12 years before abruptly resigning. We met in her small, cluttered apartment on the outskirts of the city, a space dominated by rows of filing cabinets. I kept records of everything, she explained, her hands trembling as she pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. Patient names, procedural modifications, the signatures authorizing the changes. They thought I destroyed it all when I left. "Why didn't you report them?" I asked, my voice tight. Brenda's smile was bitter. "Oh, I did. I went to the hospital administration, the medical ethics board, even the police, and every single time, the investigation just disappeared. Your husband has very powerful friends, Mrs. Sterling." She showed me entries dating back a decade. It was a meticulous, damning chronicle of specimen substitutions, falsified consent forms, and procedural irregularities. Edward's signature appeared over and over, authorizing protocol adjustments in cases that noted genetic concerns. "And my case?" I asked quietly. Brenda turned to a page marked with my name. "He was particularly hands-on with yours," she said, tapping a specific entry. "Go see Agent Miller. Tell him I sent you." Agent Frank Miller worked for a joint federal task force investigating healthcare fraud. He'd been building a case against Northwood for 18 months, but had been unable to penetrate the wall of silence surrounding the fertility clinic. Your evidence? This journal. It could be the key, he explained during our first discreet meeting. But we need more. We need financial records showing kickbacks, recorded admissions of guilt, testimony from someone who's still on the inside. I committed myself to getting him what he needed, all while maintaining the facade of a woman being reluctantly worn down by a contentious divorce. I'd smile sadly at Edward during mediation sessions that went nowhere. I let him yell at me over the phone about child support payments. I even visited his sleek new downtown apartment, pretending to consider his latest lowball settlement offer. And all the while, I was quietly recording our conversations, photographing documents from his home office, and methodically building the case against him. My investigation took a startling turn when I hired a private investigator to look into Chloe Vance's background. The report revealed something that made my blood run cold. She wasn't just Edward's colleague and lover. She was the daughter of Madeline Vance. Madeline Vance had been Edward's patient 5 years ago, a routine valve replacement that ended in tragedy when Edward allegedly made a critical error during the procedure. The hospital's internal investigation cleared him of all wrongdoing, concluding that Madeline had failed to disclose a medication that caused a fatal complication. But the truth, buried in records Agent Miller later uncovered, was that Edward had been operating on minimal sleep after spending a weekend with Chloe in Chicago. His fatigue-driven error was covered up, the records were falsified, and the family was paid off with a settlement from Northwood's discretionary fund. Madeline's husband died of a stress-induced heart attack a year later, leaving Chloe utterly alone. She had changed her last name, scrubbed her past, and methodically worked her way into Edward's life, first as a colleague, then as his mistress. Her revenge had been years in the making, just like mine was now. I debated confronting her, of proposing an alliance, but ultimately decided against it. Chloe's motives were born of grief and rage. They were emotional, volatile. Mine needed to be surgical, precise. Over the next month, I gathered testimonies from other former clinic employees, documented the money trail from Northwood to Crestview Equity, and then to a series of offshore accounts, and secured sworn statements from the 5 other families whose treatments had been compromised. Agent Miller constructed the legal framework, while I constructed something far more personal: the complete and utter demolition of Dr. Edward Sterling's carefully crafted public image. I recorded Edward during one of our co-parenting discussions, subtly steering the conversation towards our long-ago fertility treatments. "The boys have your eyes," I mentioned casually, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "Good genes," he replied, his attention fixed on his phone. "Do you ever worry they might have inherited your heart condition?" His head snapped up. "What?" "Marfan syndrome," I said evenly. "Dr. Reed mentioned it once, a long time ago." Edward's face darkened. "Reed needs to learn to keep his mouth shut about things that don't concern him. Doesn't our children's health concern you? Of course it concerns me." "There's nothing to worry about," he dismissed, waving his hand. "I had them tested years ago. They're fine. How could you test them without telling me?" My voice was sharp. "I'm their father, Lauren, and I'm a doctor. I made a medical decision." The recording captured every damning word: his acknowledgement of the condition, his admission of testing our children without my knowledge, and his continued fraudulent pretense of a biological connection. It was the final piece Agent Miller needed. The timing couldn't have been more poetically just. The annual Northwood General Hospital Gala was approaching, the most prestigious event on the city's social calendar, and this year Edward had been selected to receive the Sentinel Award for Medical Excellence, honoring his groundbreaking contributions to cardiothoracic surgery and unwavering ethical standards. The invitation arrived at our house, still addressed to Dr. and Mrs. Edward Sterling. Edward texted to inform me that he would be taking Chloe as his date, but that I was welcome to attend if it wouldn't be too awkward. I replied with the perfect blend of wounded dignity and gracious acceptance. I wouldn't miss it for the world. You deserve this recognition. What Edward didn't know was that I had already met with the hospital's chairman of the board, sharing select pieces of my evidence. A special unscheduled session had been called for the evening of the gala, immediately preceding the main event. A session where Agent Miller would present the full, explosive case against Edward, Dr. Mercer, and the entire fertility clinic. As I prepared my gala attire, a sleek, deep navy blue gown that Chloe had once mocked as suburban mom tries sophistication in a text to Edward, I received a notification from my PI. Edward and Chloe had a reservation at La Belle Vie to celebrate after the awards ceremony. Our special occasion restaurant, the place he had proposed to me 16 years ago. It was the perfect final touch to my carefully orchestrated revelation. The cream-colored envelope with the DNA results was ready. The authorities were prepared. Every detail had been considered. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of profound, calm certainty. Edward had spent 16 years living a lie. Tomorrow night, the truth would finally have its say. The night of the Northwood Gala arrived with a perfect cinematic flair. Thunderstorms were threatening but holding back, leaving the sky a dark, bruised purple, pregnant with potential. I walked into the Grand Hotel ballroom alone, wearing the navy dress Edward had always said made me look like I was trying too hard. My hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and diamond earrings, a long-ago gift from a husband who no longer existed, caught the light as I moved through the sea of medical elites. I saw Edward immediately. He was holding court near the stage, his arm draped possessively around Chloe's waist. She was wearing a gown in a shade of deep crimson, the same color as the lipstick that had started it all. The secret board meeting had concluded just 30 minutes earlier. I had watched from an adjoining room as Agent Miller laid out the evidence: the financial records, the patient testimonies, Brenda Miles's detailed journal. I saw the board members' expressions shift from polite skepticism to slack-jawed shock, and finally to grim resolution. The hospital's legal counsel had immediately contacted the district attorney's office. Of course, Edward knew none of this as he basked in the congratulations for his upcoming award. He didn't know that federal agents were discreetly positioned at every exit, waiting for Agent Miller's signal. He had no idea that his perfectly constructed life was mere minutes from total implosion. I mingled quietly, accepting insincere condolences for my failing marriage from colleagues' wives who had always viewed me as little more than an accessory to Edward's brilliance. "It's so brave of you to come tonight," whispered Margaret Reynolds, the wife of the chief of general surgery. Her sympathy felt genuine, even as her eyes kept darting towards Edward and Chloe. "I wouldn't miss seeing Edward receive the recognition he so richly deserves," I replied, my smile making her visibly uneasy. The awards ceremony proceeded without a hitch. The board chair, Dr. Helena Winters, had decided that a quiet arrest would be insufficient. The public revelation needed to be as spectacular as the deception had been. Edward ascended the stage to thunderous applause, accepting the heavy crystal trophy with practiced humility. "Medicine isn't just a science," he intoned into the microphone, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "It is a sacred trust between a doctor and a patient. Ethics must guide our every decision, our every procedure, our every moment in the operating room." I watched Chloe during his speech, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders, the calculated adoration in her eyes. She was playing a role, just as I had for so many years, but for entirely different reasons. For a fleeting moment, our gazes met across the crowded room, and something unspoken passed between us, a flicker of recognition. We were two women who knew the real Edward Sterling. After the ceremony, they left for La Belle Vie, just as my investigator had predicted. I followed 20 minutes later, the cream-colored envelope a heavy weight in my clutch. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered. Crisp white tablecloths, soft, intimate lighting, and the faint strains of an Italian opera playing in the background. The maitre d' recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Sterling, how wonderful to see you. Your husband mentioned you might be joining them." He had. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. Edward was either supremely confident I wouldn't dare show up or was setting the stage for some kind of public humiliation. Either way, it played perfectly into my plan. They were seated at our old favorite table by the window, a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux, the same vintage we'd shared on our 10th anniversary, breathing on the table between them. It cost more than a month of groceries for our children. Edward saw me first. His expression flickered from surprise to smugness as he clearly assumed I had come to make a desperate, pathetic plea. Chloe turned, her perfect features arranging themselves into a mask of polite, feigned concern. Lauren, Edward's voice carried that patronizing tone he had perfected over the years. "This is unexpected, is it?" I approached their table, my movements calm and deliberate. "You told the maitre d' I might be joining you. A courtesy, nothing more. I didn't think you'd actually have the nerve to come." Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Perhaps I should give you two a moment. Please stay," I replied, my gaze locking with hers. "After all, you've earned your place at this table, Rebecca. Or should I call you Chloe Vance?" The color drained from her face. Edward's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Chloe knows," I said softly. "Don't you, Chloe, daughter of Madeline Vance, the patient whose death you covered up, Edward, the woman whose heart valve you botched while you were exhausted from a weekend getaway with her daughter? It's all quite ironic, isn't it?" Edward whipped his head toward Chloe, dawning comprehension mixing with fury. "Is this true?" Her silence was all the confirmation he needed. I seized the moment of stunned confusion to place the cream-colored envelope on the table. "Congratulations on your freedom," I said again, my voice quiet but firm. "I think you'll find this to be interesting reading." Edward's hand trembled slightly as he tore open the flap and removed the single sheet of paper. I watched his face as his expression cycled through confusion, then disbelief, then a wave of pure, abject horror as the clinical words sank in. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Is it? You ensured your sperm was never used during our IVF treatments. You falsified medical records. You lied to me for 16 years about the very existence of our children." Chloe stared at the paper, then back at Edward, her own calculated revenge plot vaporizing before her eyes. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," Edward snapped, trying desperately to regain control. "Lauren is fabricating stories because she can't accept our divorce." "Then you won't mind explaining this to the hospital board," I replied, gesturing toward the restaurant's entrance. Dr. Winters and several other board members now stood there, flanking Agent Miller, or to the district attorney, or eventually to our children. Edward's face contorted with a terrifying rage. "You vindictive, choose your next words very carefully." Agent Miller's voice cut through the air as he approached our table. "Dr. Edward Sterling, I am placing you under arrest for medical fraud, conspiracy, and multiple financial crimes." The entire restaurant fell into a stunned silence as Miller recited his Miranda rights. Chloe sat frozen, her own carefully planned vengeance supplanted by a reckoning far more total and devastating than she could have ever imagined. "You've been planning this," Edward hissed at me as an officer snapped handcuffs around his wrists. "All those months of playing the agreeable, broken ex-wife." 16 years, Edward," I said, my voice steady. "You had 16 years to live your lie. It only took me 3 months to expose it." As they led him away, Chloe remained at the table, staring into her half-empty glass of wine. "I didn't know," she said quietly, not looking at me. "About the children." "I believe you," I replied. "Your mother deserved justice, too." In the weeks that followed, the story exploded across medical journals and national news outlets. Edward faced a battery of felony charges, his medical license immediately suspended. The Northwood Fertility Clinic was shut down, pending a massive federal investigation. Dozens of other families came forward, demanding answers about their own children's genetic origins. The financial fallout was swift and comprehensive. All of Edward's hidden assets were frozen. The court appointed a forensic accountant who traced every single dollar he had diverted. Our children's financial future was secured through a trust established with the recovered funds. Dr. Reed approached me after Edward's preliminary hearing. Northwood is establishing a new independent ethics review committee to oversee all reproductive services when they eventually reopen. They've asked me to lead it. Congratulations, Sam, I said sincerely. Actually, he said, a small smile touching his lips, I told them I would only do it if you would agree to co-chair. Your perspective would be invaluable. The offer stunned me. For 16 years, I had been Lauren Sterling, the surgeon's supportive wife. My identity had been completely subsumed by Edward's career, his needs, his public image. Now I was being asked to step into the light as myself. 6 months after the gala, I sat across from Chloe in a quiet cafe. An unlikely, unspoken truce had formed between us during the legal proceedings. Two women who had been manipulated by the same man for very different reasons. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Exposing everything?" "The children. They'll eventually learn the truth." I considered her question for a long moment. "They will learn that their origins aren't what we thought they were," I said. "But that doesn't change who they are, and it doesn't change how much I love them. The foundation of their lives was built on lies, Chloe. I chose to rebuild it on a difficult truth rather than let it crumble on a comfortable fantasy." That night, as I watched my children sleep peacefully in the home we had managed to keep, I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't satisfaction or vindication. It was liberation. The illusion of the perfect family had been shattered, but in its place stood something messy, complicated, and for the first time, truly authentic. I was no longer an actress in someone else's carefully constructed lie. For the first time in 16 years, I was the author of my own story, and it was just beginning. End of story.